One of the main hospitals in southern Israel has been hit by Iranian strikes, injuring dozens of people.
Chaos erupted in the Spanish parliament in the first session since a top aide of Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez was implicated in a corruption scandal.
One of Israel's main hospitals has been directly hit by Iranian missiles. Local officials say dozens have been injured, 3 of them seriously, and that the hospital has suffered extensive damage. Located in southern Israel, the Soroka Hospital in Beersheba provides services to approximately 1 million residents, according to the facility's website. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel will, quote, extract the full price from the tyrants in Tehran. The strike came as Israel attacked the Arak heavy water reactor in central Iran. Iranian state television said on Thursday. It claimed there was no radiation damage or damage to civilian areas, but Israel has urged the public to flee the area.
Chaos erupted in the Spanish parliament in its first session since Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez's top aide was implicated in a corruption scandal. The chaos was orchestrated by far-right Vox Party leader Santiago Abascal, who called Sanchez indecent, corrupt, and a traitor before quickly leaving the chamber. Last week, Spanish police released audio recordings which confirmed that Santos Cerdán was involved in a scheme which saw him take kickbacks in return for public work contracts. Cerdán, who was the number 3 in command in Sanchez's Socialist Workers' Party, denied any wrongdoing and resigned from his post. Spanish lawmakers demanded Sanchez's resignation as they continued to press the premier to call for snap elections. Sanchez, however, deployed a more offensive tactic in a dramatic shift from last week's apologetic tone. The Spanish leader referenced corruption cases involving other parties in a bid to undermine their standing. Sanchez referenced the Gürtel case where hundreds of opposition People's Party officers were implicated in corruption allegations including bribery, money laundering, and tax fraud. Sanchez noted that his party actively addresses corruption issues as soon as they surface while accusing the PP and Vox of covering them up. PP leader Alberto Núñez Feijóo accused Sanchez of attempting to act like a victim as he slammed him for being deeply entrenched in corruption. He also blasted Sanchez for not calling for snap elections as he claimed the Spanish premier knows he'd lose.
In an attempt to motivate people to come back home, Ukraine is allowing multiple citizenship for the first time ever in the country's history. The parliament in Kyiv, Verkhovna Rada, decided in a bill passed on Wednesday. Oleksiy Chernyshov, Ukraine's vice prime minister and minister for national unity, says it is a crucial step to motivate the Ukrainians to come back home, not only those who left after Russia's all-out war in 2022, but also those who had to leave Ukraine when Russia first invaded in 2014.
There are Ukrainians who stepped into the citizenship of other countries, and we want to continue their Ukrainian identity to give this opportunity to them. Within the current setting, there was only one choice of Ukrainian passport, so now our citizens have the solution.
Chernyshov told Euronews that Kyiv expects a third of those who left Ukraine since Russia's full-scale invasion in early 2022 to come back once the peace solution is reached.
I heard it from many ministers of European Union countries, and they value a lot Ukrainian presence. That is why we will have to also to compete for among the labor markets and to provide better conditions. That is why I'm so keen on economic development and future increase of this component in Ukraine.
See you again in Brussels.
In 3 years.
Hopefully sooner.
The conflict in the Middle East will further worsen the global economic outlook already strained by ongoing trade disputes. The managing director of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva, told Euronews in an interview.
What we witness now is more turbulence in the Middle East, which adds to uncertainty and therefore bad for business. Of course, even worse for the people that are affected by the war. For now, what we see is relatively contained impact to the area where military activities take place. But there is push of oil prices up, now at around $75 a barrel. And we don't know what would be the longevity of this conflict. Neither we know whether there would be spillovers beyond the affected countries.
Since Donald Trump's return to power as leader of the world's largest economy, international trade has been disrupted by a wave of tariffs imposed by the US administration on its global partners. Negotiations are currently underway with the EU, which currently faces tariffs of 50% on steel and aluminium, 25% on cars and 10% on all its exports to the US.
Well, the global economy has proven to be remarkably resilient to shocks, and that resilience continues. We live in a more shock-prone world, a world of higher uncertainty. And for this world, countries need to work hard to be more resilient. Do reforms at home that would make your economies stronger.
In an uncertain context, she also sees opportunities to be seized, an outlook shared by the European Commission, which is pursuing a strategy of diversifying its trading partners by expanding the number of trade agreements worldwide.
In Europe, we see increase in bilateral and plurilateral agreements, which I expect to be a big feature of the future of trade globally, not just for Europe. So, great moment for Europe, a defender of rules-based global economy, to step up, to take that leadership role of making sure that we move to a world in which, in the end, the level of tariff and non-tariff barriers goes down.
The U.S. Federal Reserve has opted to keep interest rates unchanged for a fourth straight meeting. It comes despite U.S. President Donald Trump repeatedly urging Fed Chair Jerome Powell to slash rates to boost the economy.
In support of our goals, today the Federal Open Market Committee decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged. We believe that the current stance of monetary policy leaves us well positioned to respond in a timely way to potential economic developments.
Powell says the decision to maintain rates was to allow the federal agency an opportunity to assess how Trump's global tariffs could disrupt the economy.
Every forecaster you can name who is a professional forecaster with adequate resources and forecasts for a living is forecasting pretty significant. Everyone that I know is forecasting a meaningful increase in inflation in coming months from tariffs because someone has to pay for the tariffs.
Trump, speaking to reporters ahead of the Fed's announcement, predicted that Powell would not decrease rates. He slammed the Fed chair and accused him of having a personal agenda against him.
So we have a stupid person, frankly, at the Fed. He probably won't cut today. Europe had 10 cuts, and we had none. And I guess he's a political guy. I don't know. He's a political guy who's not a smart person, but he's costing the country a fortune. I think he hates me, but that's okay. He should. He should. I call him every name in the book, trying to get him to do something.
The Federal Reserve foresees inflation, which currently sits at around 2.1%, spiking to 3% by the end of the year. They also expect a modest increase in unemployment, as well as growth slowing from 2.5% last year to around 1.4%. Powell noted that despite the projections, Fed policymakers are anticipating 2 rate cuts this year.
Thousands of demonstrators rallied in Madrid, Barcelona, and Naples on Sunday to call for an end to what they call the touristification of their cities. In recent years, mass tourism has surged in Europe for a number of reasons.
More available income in middle classes in many of the countries, more accessible travel in terms of air capacity, but also in terms of airfares. And also in many countries, and I always give the example of Europe with Schengen, the facilities of crossing borders, which have dramatically changed over the decades.
The number of international tourist arrivals in Europe has risen from 416 million in 2005 to over 747 million in 2024, according to UN Tourism. Between 2019 and 2024, tourist arrivals rose by 18% in Portugal and 12% in Spain and France. In Italy, on the other hand, they fell by 10.5% over the same period. On one hand, this influx of visitors generates jobs and revenue for tourist regions. In 2023, Spain earned $92 billion from international tourists. France received $71 billion, while Italy and Portugal took in $55 billion and $27 billion respectively. But at what cost? The increase of short-term furnished accommodation is contributing to soaring property prices and growing housing difficulties for locals. Between 2015 and 2023, property prices rose by an average of 48% in the EU, according to Eurostat. This was 105% in Portugal, 47% in Spain, 31% in France, and 8% in Italy over the same period.
The sector itself needs to define what's the carrying capacity in certain destinations, where and how can we manage better. And in this situation, new technologies help because you can do a lot with tracking movements of people. You can have more data and you can have better information.
Some municipalities, victims of their own success, have taken the problem head on. Amsterdam has banned the construction of new hotels, and Dubrovnik has limited the daily number of cruise ships that can dock.